to the Paranormal Pendle podcast, coming to you from the heart of Pendle Witch Country in the northwest of England. My name is Craig Bryant, author, investigator and collector of stories. Join me as we take a journey into the paranormal, UFO sightings, cryptozoology and big cats. This is the Paranormal Pendle podcast. Hello and welcome to episode 20 of Paranormal Pendle, broadcasting to the Paranormal UK radio network at paukradio.com. So my guest on this episode, and I'm delighted to welcome him, is artist, illustrator and author Ronald Kinsella. And Ronald has written numerous books, including the best-selling Digital Demon. Ronald, of course, is an identical twin with his brother Philip, and they co-host the Twin Souls podcast, which I believe also goes out on PAUK radio. So, Ronald, thanks very much for joining me this evening. How are things with you?
Yep, everything's fine, and it's a pleasure to be on your show, Craig. If I sound exactly like Philip, don't be alarmed, being twins that we are.
No, that's fine. I have to take your word for it that you are, in fact, Ronald, and you're not masquerading for a second week on the trot. But I had a really brilliant chat with Philip last week, so I'm sure that this week's going to be equally as fascinating. Could I start by asking you the question that I ask all my guests? How did you become interested in UFOs, UAPs, and basically anything weird? How did it all start for you?
It started much later in life because I had a very bizarre experience when I was 13 years old. One with Philip and myself, with our maternal grandmother, we had witnessed a silver sphere approaching us in their garden in Middlesex. We used to stay there for summer holidays, and this sphere, the size of a football, approached from the rear of the garden, and it hung over Grandma's head. And it wasn't a balloon. This was 1982. It seemed to exhibit a kind of sci-fi anti-gravity mechanism. It didn't make any noise, but I assumed it to be some kind of, immediately I assumed it to be some kind of electronic eye because it was watching us. It halted over her head. It didn't move an inch for a while, and then it carried on. And then after that, during the winter of that year, I had the encounter with the doctors, and it was only a single account from what I can remember of them, but they weren't, as you probably guess, real doctors.
Okay. Could you sort of go into that a little bit more then?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. We can speak comfortably about it now, but back then when I was 13 years old and snatched by them, it was a very different thing because, one, as you rightly said, I wasn't interested then. My interest in the subject was dormant, non-existent, and it would have been had this not happened.
Right.
But I was basically in my bed asleep. Philip and I shared a room. They were big rooms because we lived in a detached Victorian house. It didn't mean to say we were rich. It's just what we had. It was a lovely, big old house. It could get very cold in there, but our room was huge. And I was taken up, in a nutshell, in the dead of night. I can't tell you what day it was. I don't know the exact date because as a kid of 13, you're not going to record it. I never kept a diary. I was bone idle at school. I did try, but I was bone idle.
Yeah.
But I was basically snatched through the ceiling and I entered something hanging over the house, something very dark. I couldn't discern what this shape was. There was just something there. It was very huge and dark. And I entered this thing and I found myself in this kind of modern-looking wheelchair. I think it was white. It certainly had a sterile fill in this room I had arrived in. And I was seated in this modern kind of wheelchair. And I immediately noticed there were some figures ahead of me. There were three. I refer to them as doctors. That's what they appeared to me as. They were armoured, uniformed. Even their faces were covered. Okay. I think they were like the gas masks in the World War II soldiers used to wear, but they were much more modern. I just couldn't see their eyes.
Right.
Now, I was arrested. I couldn't move. People say paralysis. This is interesting. There was nothing restraining me. I just couldn't move up from the chair. I couldn't turn really to look. But these doctors, or assumed or alleged doctors, there was one chief one behind me. I knew there was someone behind me, and I was right when he spoke. And you know, the strange thing is, Craig, is that when he spoke, it was the Queen's English.
Okay.
I remember the very first thing he said. Now, the narrative afterwards was similar to what I've written, because I can't remember everything, you know, word for word. But the first thing he said exactly was, "We are going to perform an operation on you, Ronald." Now, when he said my name, I flinched because he knew who I was, but I didn't know who he was.
Of course, yeah.
And it was very bizarre. The room I was in, I couldn't really see the right side of myself. I wasn't more focused on that, but the left I could see. It was kind of like a hospital environment to a degree. The wall was curved, it was squat. And there was a utensil rack to my left. And I didn't really take much notice of it. It's amazing when you go back and you try and recall these details. I'm so pleased to note that I never embellish or colour them. It's a terrible thing to do, you know, when you colour or embellish. So I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
There was something there. There was some utensil rack. So it was a sterile environment. Now, I remembered pleading and begging with this doctor I couldn't see. He was obviously in charge. And he said no. He said, this has to be done. They kept harping on about this operation. It has to be done. It is for your own good. And he said that he promised me. He said to me, but I promise you we will not harm you. Now, I trusted him to that. I don't know what caused me to trust him. They were an authority. They appeared to be an authority. I was 13. I was frightened of police and doctors then. So, of course, I would obey them, albeit, you know, I'm hesitant and horrified in this bizarre environment. And there's such sudden snatching of myself in this thing. And then what he did, now this is very interesting. From the utensil rack, he picked up a tool. It was shaped like a pencil with a ball on the end, a small ball. So it's a nodule. It was silver. I think it was silver or a dull chrome. And what he did was he took my left hand. Now, I wished I'd counted the fingers on his hand. He was wearing gloves. I didn't count them. So you're not going to take note of these details when you're horrified about an operation, what he's doing. Well, from behind, he took my left hand as if he's leaning over me, and he pressed this tool on the top of my left hand, and bang, I went out like a light. I was dead to the world. Now, before I proceed to the last part of this, what's interesting is I've never had an operation in my life. I'm medically ignorant. I've never been to doctors, but recently I had an operation on my prostate. They were looking for cancer. And when they put the needles, our natural doctors, when they put the needles in my hand, it was in the left hand, exactly the same place where the unnatural doctor placed the nodule. I don't know if that has any relevance. I don't know, but I was quite astonished at that. Anyway, after this alleged operation, they threw me out. Basically, I was dropped back down into my room. I went through the loft, and I remembered being settled on my back. I could feel the bump of the mattress as I landed very carefully on the bed. And the next part of this is very bizarre. In fact, it took me 30 years to try and work out some kind of explanation as to why they showed me this. What they did was they projected on the ceiling. I mean, they were gone. I was ejected out of it. So what they projected, some kind of clever hologram or mirage, or mental stimulation, something, I don't know. It was a huge head of a Cheshire Cat. Now, this head was enormous. He took up most of the ceiling, and he was grinning. Now, our version of the Cheshire Cat in fiction is horrifying enough. This representation by them was a monster. I mean, I noticed it would look like it was made of water or liquid. It was quite that kind of feel. It was moving, but it wasn't really. It was like an illusion. So he looked like he was moving. It was light. I gather a clever trick of photons. So he just stared down at me, and then he went. And that's what kicked my interest in this much later. Now, I tried to bury that incident. I only told my brother Philip. Of course, at the time, in the 1980s, even far back to the 70s, 60s, and only even beyond that, you couldn't really talk about it. And I was wise not to at the time. It was very taboo, the subject. But the Cheshire Cat, now these strange doctors, this is what interested me about them, was the fact that, if they were aliens, and we have to be very careful how we suggest that, they're speaking the Queen's English. They're wrapped up to look like doctors, and they show me this Cheshire Cat is absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
The cat, I believe, was basically, I reckon he was an insurance policy on their behalf, so that if I go and see a psychologist and say to him, "Doctor, I've seen these doctors, these strange doctors, and they projected this Cheshire Cat," and just say, "Hang on a minute, wait there, Alice in Wonderland. You really have been down the rabbit hole. You're just getting confused." Yeah. And the ironic thing is, I had seen Alice in Wonderland a few years prior to it. I wasn't really interested in Alice in Wonderland, but I had seen it. So these clever so-and-sos had used deception or some kind of mirage to make me believe they were an authority, and that afterwards, as a goodbye present, they presented me with the Cheshire Cat. It was all, it all was quite nasty. I'm not saying they were horrible. It's the way they did it.
It must have been absolutely terrifying at such a young age.
Yes, I didn't know much about aliens. I mean, as I said, it was taboo. It was flying saucers and things. We laughed about them. But you can understand why I was so confused, because it was only much later in life, when we started investigating this, that you find out that these things have a way of tricking people. They can appear as clowns. They can appear as deceased relatives. They can appear as monkeys, even in the case of the lovely Terry Lovelace. That they play with your mind. So they pluck these things out and use them against you. Now, I have already had people suggesting that you do go down the road of saying it's sleep paralysis, were you high on drugs, or is it something, there's a mental imbalance there. It was nothing of the sort. This happened. This occurred. And I had a lot of questions to ask after this, when I had branched into the UFO phenomena, about why is it that if they knocked me out prior to the operation and they're so advanced, why didn't they just knock me out before taking me? It would have saved all the horror, Yeah. And also, when you said I was terrified, yes, I was, because after that, I was frightened of the dark, and I propped books up against the door, even an old guitar. Ironically, even though they took me through the ceiling, I was frightened.
Oh, so that's entirely understandable. It's interesting you talk about the Cheshire Cat, and obviously you said you'd seen Alice in Wonderland a couple of years earlier. I wonder if they had then obviously tapped into your memories, found this memory that they thought would be comforting to you at the end of the ordeal, and that's why that was presented to you in the way that it was.
Yeah. Absolutely, Craig. I mean, I won't argue with that. I mean, I can't be sure as to the reasons. There was a reason. It might well have been that. I absolutely agree with you. One thing about me, I hope I'm open to all forms of speculation. I've had people call me a liar. I've had people doubting my mental integrity, but this thing happened. And what is comforting is that I don't lie. I wouldn't wish to pursue this unless this had happened. And what it did was it opened up Pandora's box, because you're now down the rabbit hole, aren't you?
Yeah.
You're seeing these strange things and you want to know what they are. But, through all the research Philip and I have done, through the questions we have asked, I have reached an opinion myself personally that these things are like shadows. They cannot be caught, and they don't want to be caught. And the nasty thing about it is they leave no evidence, or hardly any evidence at all. And there must be reason behind that. We're dealing with a force. I won't say aliens. I will say a force, because we don't know what they are. That is intelligent, superior, and has a way of dodging integrity.
Yeah. Did you notice any sort of physical scars, for instance, any evidence that an operation had been carried out where they'd obviously, they'd broken the skin, for instance, or they'd cut into you or anything like that? Or did you not see any evidence at all of any physical damage?
I saw no evidence. Now, prior to this operation, when he told me, the chief doctor told me that they were going to perform an operation, I don't know why, I assumed it was to do with the head.
Right.
The brain. That's why I was terrified. I don't know why. It was just something I felt they were going to do. I don't know what they were going to do. But I had... What's interesting about this is after this, not directly after, but during school, and I was physically fit. I am physically fit, even now, even though I had a few problems. We all get them, but I had a massive fit in school. And what it was in geography. I had these 4 massive striking pains down the middle of my head, and I actually collapsed and fitted. Whether that is attributed to them, I don't know. I cannot say, you see, but I actually fitted, and I'd never had a fit before or after. So whether they had done something, and then we go on to question, we know that we've heard of the stories of them chipping people, basically to act as they are like transmitters, so they can hone in on us. But why would they put it in somewhere so precarious? Why would they stick it in somewhere that is life and death? If you tamper with the brain, you're asking for trouble. And many people have them put them in their wrists or their thighs. So I don't know. I don't know what they did. I mean, this leaves me with a complete and utter question mark, a blank as to why they did it. But what I have figured out doing this research, and to the good people in the UFO community, a lot of them, is the fact that the doctors were not real. What I mean by that is it was something else behind them. This is a common trait of this force that is able to, as we said, change faces as swiftly as they are to change the shapes and forms of their ships, although I didn't see what it was above the house.
Right. So were they humanoid in appearance then, even though you said they had sort of like armor on and like these sort of gas masks and everything? I mean, were they basically the same as us, body, 2 arms, 2 legs, torso, head?
Yes, they were. The chief doctor, I couldn't see him.
Right.
I only saw his hands, but I didn't take much note of them. They were gloved. The 3 ahead of me were completely covered. They didn't speak at all. They were just like waiting. I guess this one behind me was in charge until he placed the nodule on my hand. I just blanked out, and that was it. I saw no more of them. But they were humanoid, yes.
Yeah. Do you still? I mean, do you have nightmares about it, Ronald? Do you? Do you have panic attacks or anything like that, or is it something that you've managed to sort of reconcile yourself that this happened and it's a mystery, or is it something that's still really, it's frightened the right word, because it sounds like an absolutely terrifying experience, and
yes,
for a 13-year-old boy. I mean, I remember what I was like at 13. I would have been absolutely and utterly terrified. So is it something that you think has changed you in the long term?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say that at the time it terrified me. I mean, I placed books against the door, a guitar. As I said, ironically, they took me up, but of course I didn't understand that. And I also used to shove books up my back, hardback books. So I was afraid if someone was stabbing me. It screwed me up big time. One of my friends, an artist friend of mine, Neil Geddes Ward, he did make me laugh recently. He said, perhaps you put the books up there to weigh you down so that when they use their tractor beam or whatever, they might be unsuccessful. Good. It's nice to have tongue in cheek, it's nice to have a laugh, but no, it was terrifying. I didn't have nightmares.
Right.
After that, I guess I just pushed it to the back of my mind, but at the time I was terrified of them seeing them again, even though they weren't nasty. The way they did it was, I mean, it's basically as Philip Mantle. I mean, he's a mentor of mine and Philip's. He's our publisher. He published my book. He's a wonderful man. He wrote a book called Without Consent. Well, I think that just sums it up quite beautifully, doesn't it? Without consent, you're snatched. Without consent. Now, I did wonder about these alleged doctors, although I now suspect they weren't really what they were. Is it possible that if they had put something in me, a tracking device, is it possible that that's why I have been seeing these UFOs? Philip and I have been seeing these UFOs every 2 or 3 years. I haven't seen them again, but I've seen the UFOs every 2 or 3 years. We see something. Is it possible that what they're doing, and I said this is quite alarming, what I assumed was like, if they put these things in us, now we assume them to be trackers, don't we?
Yeah.
But what if we go a step further? And this is frightening. What if it's like something from the invaders? What I'm going to say now is that what they can do is use these things to actually act as their eyes and ears. Basically, they can see everything we see, and they can hear everything we can hear using these things. Now, wouldn't that be very disturbing? It's only a hypothesis. Yeah, it's only a hypothesis. But, you know, the thing with this subject, this is what I found, Craig, as we delve down the rabbit hole, is the fact that you'll have a lot of people with opinions. That's fine, as long as you're not tunnel visioned. I am not. I'm open to all forms of speculation. You know, you have those who say that they are adamant they are aliens and from the Pleiades or from the Draconian star system. I don't know. We've got no proof. But when they're settled on that, or even time travelers from the future, albeit slightly different, there's no proof. I can't prove to anyone that the doctors were real. I have no proof. So they can't give us proof of their own beliefs. So we're at loggerheads. So I think it's best if we keep an open mind to everything, whether they might even be the dead. Now, I've actually mentioned this in my book, The Digital Demon. Is it possible that what we're dealing with is the dead, who has taken on this fanciful guise that attracts us, a flying saucers and this alien presence, and they've copied it so that we're cushioned by some kind of model, some kind of geography to it all, you know, so that they can infiltrate us that way. I mean, it's quite possible, but highly unlikely, but it's possible.
Yeah, well, every possibility is possible, isn't it? Which is a strange saying, but it is true, isn't it? I actually wanted to ask you about your book, the Digital Demon. So that brings us on quite nicely to that, actually. You've got some different theories, haven't you, about various subjects? So, for instance, the Greys, what people call the Greys.
Yes.
You have some theories on what they are or what they're not. Could you?
Yeah, I can elaborate on that. Yes.
Elaborate on that. Yeah.
Yes. Now, it's highly possible. I mean, we've covered the dead aspect. I mean, they do look very embryonic, these things we call the Greys. I wondered sometimes if it's possible that they are damned souls that are trying to find some kind of retribution, some kind of hope through reincarnation, fallen angels, demons. I mean, I've also speculated that we have to look at the more generally accepted hypothesis of them actually being aliens or being made by a superior race. I said to Philip yesterday on a program with a gentleman, a wonderful Chris Messier, he had us on his show, and we discussed this about them. And I said, well, if we were a superior race and we were interested in a planet and we had the capability, we could build little men, not in the sense of mechanically, but if you're so advanced biologically. So is it possible that a superior race has made them to act as their eyes and ears themselves and dispatch them to Earth to analyze us? I mean, there's that hypothesis. and we're talking perhaps even interdimensional, because I find it hard to believe that they're actually coming from outer space at the moment with so much equipment we have up there.
Yeah.
I mean, and telescopes more freely available, and technology is so advanced. They're finding some other way of penetrating the Earth. And the big question is about these. Are they here for the good? Now, what makes me laugh about this, Craig, is that I'm not being facetious or detrimental to the people who believe there is some kind of federation, which I don't believe at all. I don't believe in any kind of federation. I believe in them being here because I've seen them, and I've seen their what we call their ships or their electronic eyes. Are they here for the good? Now, when I researched this, I looked in, let's go back to the basics of the 50s and 60s when you had experiencers or abductees, alleged abductees, who met them, these Nordics, the beautiful blonde-haired, blue-eyed ones, and they were preaching to them. This is what I couldn't work out myself, and I've written about this in my book. They were preaching the aliens about their concerns for atomic, then and now nuclear warfare. And they kept harping on about this. Well, my argument was that why would they approach people of non-governmental influence? And secondly, if they're so advanced and they're so concerned because this was such a grave matter, they could just whip around and nullify them, all of them, across the world. We build more, which we will do because the human race will not give up. They do the same, and we think, oh, hang on a minute, we don't know what's happening. They're useless. We can't build them. They've won, Craig. They've won the game. They didn't. So I assume this may have well been a deception. And this is where it gets very dark with these so-called greys, when people suggest they're here for the good of mankind. I do not feel they're here for the good of mankind. I'm not saying they're going to openly attack us or destroy us. They could have done that years ago quite swiftly. It's not that. It's something else. But I would consider their modus operandus to be anything but nice.
Yeah, because, of course, other than in Hollywood films, you're quite right. They never land on the lawn of the White House and go and speak to the President of the United States, or they don't land at the gates of Downing Street and ask to go and speak to whoever the Prime Minister is at the time. So they do tend to abduct people who are, with all due respect, not as important as some other people in our government and our society. So that's an interesting point. And it's also an interesting point, actually, about what you mentioned about them looking like embryos, because I've never thought of that. But now it makes total sense.
Yes. I mean, why? You see, they're snatching us beyond our consent. There's no consent. They're doing this.
Yeah.
And what I've read cases of people who have first seen them and they're horrified, and then they come out and say, oh, it's for the betterment of my own spirituality. They're teaching me things. I don't believe that at all. No. I think it's like what's in vogue. Whatever's in vogue. If people more sway to the opinion that they're nice, a lot of people are going to write books about them being nice. Yeah. If it's a balance, isn't it? If more people feel they're negative, they're going to sway to that. You can't win with it. I have always been set of the opinion that even though the doctors weren't nasty, they had a mission, some kind of agenda. There was something there, and they were very clever, very smart, even knowing my name. So if they know my name and they know the preferences, as you rightly said, Craig, they plucked out the Cheshire Cat. Perhaps as a comfort thing, it might be possible, or as an insurance policy. They knew me very well, so they know us very well. And this gets into cloning, because as we're on the matter of the greys, another issue which I have is of this hybridization, this hybrids. Now, I don't discount that they may have, if they are what they are, scientists, they would of course experiment with DNA, genetics. It's possible they've done a few, but when you read or hear about people saying that they eventually plan, and come on, we've heard it, to colonize the world with this superior breed of hybrids, I draw a line on that, because the hybrids who allegedly have been made by them or genetically nurtured by them are announcing their hybrids. Now, if I was a superior force and I had created an army, I'm hardly going to tell them they're from my own hand. I'm not going to tell them. Why would they tell them? Why would they broadcast to them that they are hybrids? Would it be far better to keep it secret?
Yeah, it would, absolutely. So we a lot of people who claim to have been abducted, and there's numerous examples, and I wouldn't want to ask you to name a particular example, but what I'm getting from you, Ronald, is that you're not convinced by a lot of reports of people, the way that the abductions happen, especially the ones where people claim that the in inverted commas, these aliens are here to better the human race. They're here for our benefit rather than for other nefarious purposes. Would you say then that you're leaning towards the fact that they're here for purposes that are not going to benefit the human race, and also the fact that the abductees tend to say that they are friendly towards them, they are benevolent towards them? Do you feel that in a lot of cases that's simply not the case?
Yes, because as I said, the research I've done, and this is in black and white, of the abductees who were preached by the aliens, that their concerns for atomic and nuclear warfare came to absolutely nothing. So then we find a wave, or this new fad of, and I'll say it bluntly, of them now concerned with environmental issues. Yeah. And you can bet your bottom dollar they're not going to do anything. This is a pattern which is consistent in deception. And why are they doing this? It's as if they're trying to keep us looking one way when we should be really looking another. And I'm not saying they're here to colonize and dominate the world. They could have done that quite easily and swiftly, years ago. And if they wish to exterminate us, they could do it in a second, I would imagine. All they need to do is release some kind of superior germ and we're dead. But they haven't, and this is troubling. So yes, I tend to find that I'm not painting everyone with the same brush, you understand, as far as abductees are concerned. I do believe a lot of people are taken by them. But with this subject, it can be embellished because it can't be measured or proved. Some people are having a field day with it, Yeah. You see, what's interesting also is the fact that the aliens themselves have changed, haven't they, quite swiftly? We were heavily into the 50s. The Nordics were quite popular. Yeah. And then we had some vague impressions of the Greys, but they didn't become popular until Steven Spielberg released his Close Encounters of the Third Kind film. I know they were friendly in that, but the overall image of them became very popular. Now, is it possible that this force is able to look at our trends, our fads and fancies, and build on them? You see what I mean? If they can manipulate the mind, they can do anything. And this is frightening. If they're the Greys now, what are they to be in the future? They're going to change again. They're always one step ahead. This is not based on my own thought. This is other brilliant researchers who have realized a pattern of progression that's always one step ahead of us, from the dirigibles, the airships that were first in the sky before we could create them, to the aircrafts, to the rockets, to the saucers, to now the triangular ships. It's quite disturbing and very intriguing all the same. As to what they want, I couldn't tell you. I have no idea what they are. I couldn't tell you. But I think it's absolutely wonderful that we have this speculation. It's rather like a jigsaw puzzle with all these pieces, and you try and put them together. And what the aliens do is they just shuffle the board. It's all gone again. They leave you no evidence, no proof. And I think they're having a wonderful time, whatever they are, because they know that we're always beaten in terms of proof, and we're laughed at. And this taboo subject of them must be absolutely wonderful. considering their elusive agenda. I mean, I mentioned them being perhaps possibly the dead. It is a possibility. I know some people have laughed at that, but we can't. It's no more fantastic than saying that they are coming from outer space, as far as we are concerned. You know, until we become comfortable or until we are visited, and it's solid proof of being befriended by these aliens from across the stars, we're going to just consider it taboo.
Yeah, so it's almost as if they are presenting themselves in almost whatever's in fashion
Yes.
at the time. So yeah, you sort of mention the 50s and the 60s, and then coming through now to the big thing is environmental concerns, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, from going from the Cold War of the 60s and 70s and the 80s, when they seemed to be focusing on, as you quite rightly said, you know, the nuclear power stations, nuclear weapons, that sort of thing. Just going right back then to sort of like one of the earliest documented UFO incidents that we've had, of course, is Roswell, and I believe that you've got some interesting theories on Roswell in the book.
Yeah. Yes. Of course, that's the crown jewel of the UFO paradox, isn't it? The Roswell incident of 1947. Now, I'm very proud to have published a theory in that, which was done in March of 2021. And Jack Valet, in May afterwards, his book, Trinity, came out, where he suggested that the crash ship was a gift. I had suggested before him that it was a Trojan horse, because I kept thinking about, if this was true, which I believe an exotic craft did crash there, something of magnitude did land there, to have created such an interest from the military. It wasn't a weather balloon. We know that. We know. Was that fact that if it could traverse the immensity of space, bypassing all the horrors of it, all interdimensional, how on earth could it just crash or be brought down by lightning? I didn't believe it. So I kept thinking this was planned. This was staged. The crew inside were probably grown or made to act as pilots. The technology in there was perhaps of the superior race who did this. So it was directed down in a little fashion, a play, somewhere remote, you know, where the military could find it. I mean, you can't exactly land it in the town. It never happens, you know. So this is a clue. It's intent for covering, you know, the technology. But I assumed, what if it was a Trojan horse? Now, we're going to criticize the military, but I don't think we should really. Now, thinking about it recently, we can't blame them, because this, if it was, which I suspect it was, a ship from another world or off-world craft, they're hardly going to announce it. They did to begin with, but then they had to retract, and we'll understand why they had to retract to say it was a weather balloon, because we must understand the political sensitivity at the time across the world. If China and Russia and others realized that the United States had in their possession the remnants of an alien craft, it would be absolute hell, because their backs would go up and they'll think, well, why has it crashed there? Why is the United States so special to have gained that technology? And secondly, they'll be cautious and guarded over what they might attain from it in time. Weaponry, biomechanical equipment, germ warfare. You see, they couldn't announce it. The military did the right thing. I'm going to get flack for this, but they did. They did the right thing in playing silent. And as they say, silence is golden. So if this was deliberately downed, why? And the only thing that came to mind was what it contained, something it contained. The bodies were expendable, evidently, I assume. This is my own hypothesis of it. They were just created to pilot the ship. I doubt if the crew had any knowledge of where they were going, really, or what their mission was. They were just designed and built to drive the vessel. And this gave it this illustration of this craft being from another world. But was it? You see, we go a step further. That could it be something else? As we said, this deception of playing out this thing, appearing as a vessel from another world with alien bodies when it could be something else? Is this something much darker? This is what I said, Craig. I'm open to all forms of speculation. I think if you look at everything, from whether they're from outer space, from under the water, from interdimensional, from Antarctica, from all manner of possibilities, we're going to get somewhere. But the trouble with this subject is that you have people who are tunnel visioned. Now, another thing I will say about these aliens is, all right, if they're coming from the future, I'm not going to doubt that, but they're not coming here to harvest us for some kind of Noah's Ark salvation, biological, for the future if they've lost their way. They wouldn't pick this time. And the reason why, I assumed, is because we are respectfully put, soiled, biologically soiled. They would pick a point when we had cured most diseases, when we were purified. That's where they would head towards in a time frame. So the fact of these aliens coming back to take DNA didn't make any sense to me.
No. It's interesting what you were saying about the craft at Roswell and the US military keeping it quiet. Because if you were sat in the Kremlin and you were suddenly told that an alien spacecraft had landed in America and the American military were taking it apart bit by bit, you're quite right in saying that they would be worried, concerned, frightened, and would possibly want to have a preemptive strike in order to stop any massive, technological advances being taken by the US military. So that's a very interesting theory. So you don't think then, like some theories are, that some of the rapid technological advances that we've made over the last 50, 60 years, so microchips and various other things, didn't originate from these crashed crafts. There's something that we've just developed on our own, and it's not based on alien technology. How would you feel about that statement?
I wouldn't say so. It is highly possible that certain aspects of it have been utilized. I mean, the transistor jumped from then to the microprocessor. So we move on from there. We don't know. I can't prove that. I do remember reading some testimonies from people who allegedly came across the bodies, but we have to be very careful how we approach that. The alien autopsy they showed on TV, I'm going to rub some people up the wrong way. I did not believe it. I did not believe that. They had the bodies, but those were not the ones. I'm sorry. I don't believe that, because it's a red herring, and we always led up the garden path, and this is what they want. They want to completely keep throwing these things out, so we're completely thrown. I would imagine if the military had come across those bodies, they were so different, it would have been so shocking to them, so shocking, to have found this piece of equipment with these assumed pilots. Most of them were dead. I believe one survived. We can't clarify that. In fact, the whole thing is washed in conspiracy, so we can't prove a damn thing. But one thing we do have is evidence of a heavy military outfit being sent there, and they wouldn't do that for a weather balloon, especially when children were picking them up and getting paid some bucks for finding these mogul balloons that happen to just wash up on land, So something very bizarre happened. But as I said, I do not blame them. We have to look at this very carefully. Of course, they'll deny everything. Even today, they'll deny it. But we have to understand why they did that, especially at that time as well. I think even today, if something crashed there, they'd cover it up.
Yeah. So do you think that there's been crashes in other places in the world, other parts of the world?
Yes, I do. I think that's highly possible. But of course, like the Americans, they're going to keep it quiet, aren't they? They're going to keep it quiet. I think snippets come out from witnesses. Sometimes there are lucky people who actually see portions of wreckage. And that's what I came to the conclusion of. You see, if they were, which I suspect, dropping these things over the world, they would have to look different. The ships would have to look different. The pilots would have to look different. From the research I've done, they did, so that they wouldn't raise eyebrows with anyone, that these look like they were coming from different species when it might be possible it's coming from one that's doing this so as not to raise suspicion, and if so, why? I can't tell you. I mean, I know where you're leading on with this, Craig. The future, a cybernetic horror, is it possible that we're to become prisoners under this tech? It would seem so, because the way the world's going at the moment, it doesn't look very good. It's going to be marvelous in a technological aspect, but it's going to be a Frankenstein future. Are these things patient and waiting for this to happen? We don't know. We can't say. Are they helping us? I don't think so. I don't think they're helping us in that respect, because everything is concealed. It's denoted as a lie from our own people. Even the military covering it up. I've explained why, but it's as if it has created paranoia. That's the word. It's paranoia, and reluctance for a lot of people even then to come out with this. So, it doesn't sound good to me.
What are your feelings on reptilians?
Yes, I have a friend. He's a sound gentleman. His name is Frank Willis. And he has seen one of these.
Okay.
And he's a sound, intelligent gentleman. And numerous other people have seen them. I personally haven't, not in the physical sense, but I do believe that there is something to them. I remembered reading, I wished I could find out who it was. This religious gentleman, he was a hotel tycoon in the US, and he had to remain anonymous due to his profile, but he went on holiday with his family, in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And they were camping up for a weekend, and he happened to see this circle of people way down below performing some kind of ceremony. And this reptilian appeared in the center of it. So it's as if they had summoned it. It's only going by what he said. I can't prove this is true or not, although I suspect it might be. And this thing seemed to know they were watching it through their binoculars, and it shot right up to them. It came up and it paralyzed them, you see. It was very interested in the women, but it basically told them, I think from what I can remember, is that if you go now, I'll do nothing to you. You won't be harmed, but you're not going to say anything about this. It's very bizarre, these things, these reptilians, they pop up everywhere. I don't believe everything about them. You have to be careful. But certainly with the military as well, I believe I've written an account of a gentleman in the army. I think he was stationed in Germany at the time, where I was allowed to use this, but I had kept him anonymous. This is through Christopher Turner as well, the producer of Don't Mention the Reptilians, a wonderful man, lovely chap. Or it would help you out with anything if you needed to source material. But this gentleman had seen one in the barracks. It was camouflaged rather like the Predator. And it just so happened this army officer had woken up in the barracks, and the sun was glinting through the windows, particular where it was hanging, the sun, that it betrayed this thing. And he could see it was like one of these reptilians that had a belt on it with these kind of bullet-shaped objects running around it. And he wondered if that was part of its camouflage technique, but it didn't harm him. It just put him back to sleep, but it alarmed him. So, we read about these reptilians popping up everywhere in military bases as well. And if they're in there, why are they in there? It's quite alarming, isn't it? Are they trying to figure out, the current militaristic form of that particular regiment? You don't know, and why. But I do believe in them. Yes, they come under the demonic aspect. The demons. You see, this is, again, we're looking at this from different species. Some people believe there are so many hundreds of species, whereas I'm wondering if we're being tricked or deceived. They're there, they're physically there, but they can infiltrate places and appear as different. Before the Greys were popular and the Nordics in the 50s, I did realize prior to that there was a smattering of different kind of aliens. I noticed this in terms of their appearance. The goblins, fairies, and all manner of strange-looking things, until it was set in stone to a degree after the Nordics with the Greys. They were set in stone. So it makes me wonder if we're actually dealing with one or many of them.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder whether if it is one species, then are they sort of manipulating us to see them in a particular form, or if it is a number of different species, then obviously they're quite diverse and quite different. It's interesting you talk about the reptilians, because obviously I chatted with your brother about this only last week, and he had some really interesting theories. And of course, we mentioned a certain famous Mr. Ike, who has some quite strong theories about the reptilians and about what they're here for. I mean, do you hold to those theories that they are sort of pulling the strings, as it were, from higher up in our governments, for instance?
Yeah, I do agree with him on that, but I don't agree on what they're saying in terms of people. I think this is an independent force. If this is true, if this is a ring of them or a number of them here, they would be independent of people. They'd be able to control them, because we must remember that. If you were a superior race and you arrived on a planet, or you interdimensional or through space, to a select group of elite people, they're going to bend over backwards for you, and they'll do it with a smile, because you're technologically advanced, you're wiser in their eyes. Of course, they're going to shoot people with a smile, or they will do, because they feel enforced and godly in the presence of these beasts. So I can't say for certain, but it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, I have great respect for David Icke, always have. He's a lovely man, and he's very on the ball. And one thing that betrays his brilliance is the fact of them banning him on certain platforms, which we shan't mention. And I think that's quite unfair. I think that's very unfair, because everyone should voice opinions freely. Because if you don't, we have seen now, and this is troubling me about what's happening, we're now beginning to see, and people don't want to hear it, the rise of a fascist state. And it is becoming a fascist state, because when you're denied the freedom of speech, that becomes a problem, and this is where barriers are building, suspicion rises. So we are dealing with a very deceptive pool of thought, perhaps even from the government. I mean, let's be honest, they lie already. They've been proven to lie. They lie all the time. We've seen the past with history of leaders, not all, but a good deal of them, who are corrupt, power mad, and imperious and aloof, and completely disregard the working class or those below them. They become self-elected gods. So if someone's pulling their strings, or they know something, some ancient religion or some ancient kind of ancestry that belongs to something else, I think you know what I mean by that, then yes, they will do it. They'll do it with a smile. So, it doesn't help. You see, everything at the moment, I'm finding as I get older, we're having our own politicians lie to us. We're having people lie. And when that happens, I believe order cracks. It begins to break down. The media itself is fascist, because I've noticed this, and certainly the rise of it in the past 4 years. I would say 4 years. It's got very bad, where control is becoming a problem. They are narrowing down and focusing on certain things that shouldn't be said. And I think it's a terrible thing. So, and on top of that, we have this extraordinary force that's infiltrating the earth that they will not acknowledge. Now, that press release they were pushed to do, analyzing the actual UFO problem, was an absolute joke. And I said this before, it was a farce. I read through that document. Philip Mental, my publisher, wonderful man, he sent me that, and I read it, and I couldn't believe it. At the end of this apparent alleged disclosure form, which was anything but, Did they start from? I think it was, if I remember correctly, 2014. They started this approach to the present day. They wouldn't acknowledge the past. They had to drum something up. You see, they were under pressure, so they had to drum something up very quickly, and they did. And we were all excited. Yes, we all were. But imagine my absolute anger after reading that.
Yeah.
At the end it says, "But there might. Is it possible?" It reminds me of the old Arthur C. Clarke programs I used to watch on The Mysterious World of Arthur C. Clarke, I think it was called, when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Now, Arthur C. Clarke, he's a genius, don't get me wrong, but on this program, even back then about mysteries, he'd blow up this wonderful balloon. As the program persisted of these mysteries, he'd blow this balloon right up, you watch it rising, and then at the end, he'd stick a pin in it. So it's rather like that, we get these pins and they burst the balloons every time. So I don't have faith in our government at all. I think the Constitution is collapsing. If they carry on this way, it's going to falter. I will wonder when these fools realize that even Rome, the greatest empire the earth ever saw, was reduced to dust in the end.
Yeah,
do they really think they're going to win?
Yeah, no, it's a fair point, and I'm married to a history teacher, and she constantly draws historical parallels to the way that society is at the minute, and not just in this country but across the world. And one thing we are very good at, I think, as a species, is repeating our mistakes. We don't seem to ever learn from them. And I think that's quite an interesting point. What are you looking at the moment then? What's your sort of area of investigation at the minute? What projects have you got on the go, or what projects are you looking at doing in the future?
Well, I'm currently working on a science fiction book, because I love science fiction, and people will say you're imaginative. I've had it, Craig. I've had it. Don't even go there. I'm working on a science fiction book to do with AI, artificial intelligence, the horrors that avenue may take. Yeah. It's been done to death. It's an old tune, I know, but mine has a twist in it. Okay. And I'm also working on a sequel of The Digital Demon. It's not to cash in on anything, because when you're in the UFO branch, you don't make much money from your books and that. It's not about the money. That's absolutely true. People say, "Oh, he's in it for the money." You don't make much money from them. I want to get the message out, as many other people do. I'm working on a book based on, this might interest you, of psychic awareness. I've had some very strange things happen to me as of late, to do with premonitions.
Okay.
Yes, only a few. They're sporadic, they have no control, but a number of them have come true. I know people will say it's coincidence. I don't believe in coincidence. I don't believe that at all. They are illustrated in my book. I've already published them in The Digital Demon. The events that I have seen, I've even had proof from people that these have happened. So I'm looking into that, studying it, looking into this incredible paradox, of foresight, even though I have no control over it. And as I said, it's brief and sporadic. It just happens, and very rarely. But when I see it, my goodness, I do see it.
So do you think that you have any particular psychic abilities then, or mediumship abilities or anything like that? Or do these premonitions just come?
I went to see a medium 25 years ago when my grandmother died, and she was incredible. Let's remove the taboo. I think, you get the good, the bad, and the ugly. I was fortunate to have a damn good medium. She worked for the FBI. She did work for them, you see. They won't announce it either, because, as I said, it's taboo. But I saw her, and she brought everything through. I couldn't believe it. It was a slap in the face I needed prior to researching the UFOs. But she told me that in my 40s, I would develop psychically. We are all, I believe, psychic. I think we all have it. It's just trying to attune to it or recognizing it, I think. But it wasn't my 40s when it started, in my 50s. So, like everything with me, I'm a late learner or a late starter. So, it's a bit late, but it seemed, and it isn't through the will of doing it. This is just happening. And it's very subtle. to recognize the signs is very subtle, and you have to trust it as well. I can't explain it, but as I said, I've documented it in my book anyway, certain events that occurred.
You're certainly right about the fact that it's certainly not a road to riches, writing books on the subject of UFOs and indeed the paranormal, as I've found myself. It's something that you know, you're obviously very similar to me in the fact that you do it because you want to do it, and you do it because you enjoy doing it, and you want to explore these big questions. How can people get in contact with you, Ronald? What's the best way to contact with you?
I am on Facebook under Ronald Kinsella. And Philip and I have a website because I'm an artist as well. I've always had this flair for art, and it's boded very well, because with this UFO subject, I'm able now to illustrate people's ideas of the Greys or these aliens and the Reptilians. So the website has got a lot of my images on there, pictures I have done. As I said, I've turned digital recently. The last 8 years now, I won't go back to traditional acrylic or watercolor because that's messy and expensive, whereas digital is cheaper in the long run, and it's much more effective. The website is at www.thekinsellatwins.com. That's KINSELLA twins.com. And on there you can see about myself and Philip, the artwork, as I said, our books, and also some information about the paranormal. Philip Mantle is also listed on there under his Flying Disc Press. And I will say to the listeners that if you want to read some good books by him, and he's a man of absolute integrity, if you visit there and go on Philip's page, Philip Mantle, you'll see a link to all the books there. So if you have any interest in UFOs or the paranormal, it's all there. He's got many books based on this subject, and they're written by intelligent people, some scientists as well, who are looking into this paradox and who are just wonderful. So it's nice to have them on our side as well.
Yeah, I've spoken to Philip myself. I interviewed Philip last year, and yeah, he was a really interesting guy, and he does some great work. So yeah, I always advise people to go and have a look at his work as well. So yeah, that's good stuff. Well, best of luck with your future project. Best of luck with your next book. It's been really interesting talking to you. I'm really grateful for you to come. That you've come on the podcast, and best of luck in the future, Ronald.
Thank you very much, Greg. It's a pleasure to be here with you as well, and thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome. Pleasure's been all mine. Thank you. Thanks to Ronald for coming on this episode of the Paranormal Pendle podcast. You can visit my website at www.craigbryant.co.uk. Paranormal Pendle will return, and remember to keep watching the shadows.